And one good thing about
She'll read it from the cover to cover.
Good afternoon. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Peter Schweizer of the Government Accountability Institute and a Tallahassee resident here. He is also a best-selling author. Some of his books you might have heard before, Extortion and Throw Them All Out. Both of those were on the Times bestseller list as well as the Washington Post. The template created by Peter in books like Extortion and Clinton Cash, in which Peter examines the way politicians use their connections and power to increase their own personal wealth, is now being used by reporting outlets all over the country during this current presidential cycle. He has other nonfiction books, Reagan's War, which I just saw up here on the desk. Somebody was getting autographed. It was praised by the Washington Post as a fascinating, well-written, useful, and important look at one of 3 or 4 most important American political leaders of the 20th century. His articles have appeared in Foreign Affairs, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, the National Review, and elsewhere. And he has appeared in national radio and television programs all over the country. Help me welcome Peter Schweizer.
Thank you. It's so great to be back here at NEBA. I think I've spoken here on 2 other occasions. I will say we had a little bit of a communication problem when it came to arranging this speech. There were emails sent that I didn't receive. What we discovered was that those emails somehow ended up on a server in a bathroom in Denver. But don't be worried. When we examined the server, somebody had taken a cloth and wiped it clean, so it was in very good shape. Anyway, it's great to be here. Certainly there's been a lot of discussion about the Hillary Clinton server, which really, despite what you hear from some people are trying to spin, is totally unprecedented in American history to have a U.S. cabinet officer, any U.S. federal government employee, to set up a server separate and distinct from the federal government and then run classified information through it. I'm not the person to talk about technology. People in my office will tell you that my nickname is Fred Flintstone. So I'm not here to tell you the how of the email scandal and the server, which I think is very, very serious. But I'm here to talk to you about the why. Why is it that the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, took it upon herself, with the help of aides and her husband, to set up a server completely and totally separate and distinct from the federal government apparatus? Why would you do that? You are creating a situation where you're going to face legal jeopardy. You're creating a situation where American national security secrets can be compromised. Why did you go to that extent? And what I would contend to you is part of the answer, a big part of the answer, lies in the very issues that I talk about in Clinton Cash. Well, what are those issues? What Clinton Cash is ultimately about is the unprecedented flow of literally hundreds of millions of dollars from foreign sources to the Clintons. Some of that money came in the form of speaking fees paid to Bill Clinton while she was Secretary of State. Some of that money came in cash money given to the Clinton Foundation, which is their legacy project. And why do I say this is unprecedented in American history? Well, because the United States has had a long tradition, legally and politically, in saying that politics may be a very dirty game, and it is, but it's a game that needs to be played exclusively by Americans. We have federal laws, and those laws have been upheld by the Supreme Court, which say we don't want foreign money coming from foreign corporations, foreign investors, or foreign governments trying to influence our political process. This was actually challenged in the Supreme Court in 2012. And for those of you who watched the Supreme Court, you might be surprised to know that the Supreme Court came back 9-0, saying that no, this law is very constitutional. We do not want foreign nationals. When Hillary became Secretary of State, his speaking fees overseas tripled overnight. Now, either one of 2 things happened. Number one, Bill Clinton suddenly, in late 2008 and early 2009, suddenly became even more incredibly eloquent than he was before. Or people were paying inflated speaking fees because they wanted something from the Clintons. And I think the evidence of that is overwhelming. Let me just give you a couple of examples. Bill Clinton's biggest speaking payday ever is from a Swedish company called Ericsson. You might be familiar with them. They're a telecom company. They produce cell phones. They produce things for elaborate telecom systems. And Ericsson was in trouble beginning in 2009 with the State Department, which, of course, Hillary Clinton was running. Now, what was the problem? Well, the problem was Ericsson had this habit of selling telecom equipment in lucrative contracts to governments like Iran and Syria and Belarus. This is not something the State Department wanted done. And Hillary's State Department actually, and we have the State Department cables on this, actually went to the Swedish foreign minister and said, look, you need to get Ericsson to stop doing this. We don't want Ericsson to do this. They had meetings with Ericsson where they pressed them, and they even threatened we are going to potentially broaden sanctions to include your telecom equipment so you cannot sell your telecom equipment to these companies, to these countries. So in the midst of all of this, what happens? Ericsson decides, for the first time ever, they'd never paid Bill Clinton to give a speech before, they decided they're going to pay him $750,000 for a single speech. Now again, they'd never paid for a speech before. This is the first time ever, but kind of like in comedy and politics, timing is everything. And I think they decided the way we try to fix this problem was we put money in the Clintons' pockets, and they did. Bill Clinton gave the speech, was paid $750,000, his biggest payday ever for a speech. 9 days later, the State Department, under Hillary Clinton's name, issued a statement that said, we are not going to broaden sanctions involving telecom equipment. We're going to rely on companies like Ericsson to police themselves. End of story. The problem is taken away. Let me give you another example of the sort of self-enrichment we're talking about. People here familiar with the Keystone XL pipeline? Imagine this, the Canadians would bring oil into the United States, it would lower energy prices even further, it would boom the American economy, create high jobs, high-paying jobs, and yet there was a lot of controversy about this. Barack Obama was resistant to it, and Hillary Clinton was resistant to it as Secretary of State, at least at first. But you see, when Hillary Clinton became appointed as Secretary of State, Bill Clinton got another lucrative speaking gig. In fact, he got 10 of them. There was a company in Canada called TD Bank Investment Group that decided that they wanted to pay Bill Clinton to do 10 speeches for $2 million. Again, they had never paid Bill Clinton for a speech before. Timing is everything. Bill Clinton gives those 10 speeches. After he gives the last speech, Hillary Clinton's State Department comes out with a finding green-lighting the Keystone XL pipeline, saying that we don't see any environmental or economic reasons to stop this pipeline from being built. Pretty good deal, right? Now, did I tell you that the TD Bank Investment Group that had just paid Bill Clinton $2 million for speaking fees was the largest shareholder in the Keystone XL pipeline at the time? Pretty interesting fact, right? These are the kind of patterns that you see occurring over and over and over again in the sort of global pay-to-play arrangement that we had. And again, remember, in the normal context, this would be completely illegal. The notion that you could have a sitting cabinet officer, the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Defense, have their spouse receive large paydays from foreign entities that had business sitting on the spouse's desk, that's never happened in American politics, but it happened under the Clinton administration. Let me give you another example. We've talked about money that went straight into the Clintons' pockets in the form of these speaking fees. And by the way, just to give you an illustration of the type of money we're talking about, Bill Clinton, again, his average speaking fee is about $178,000. During his entire speaking career tenure since 2001, he has given 14 speeches for which he has been paid $500,000 or more. Only 2 of those occurred while his wife was not Secretary of State. So the real big paydays occurred while Hillary Clinton was making decisions that were affecting people that were paying the Clintons money. Well, let me talk about the Clinton Foundation for a little bit, because this is another avenue for influence. And again, completely unprecedented in American politics. Think about if somebody else tried to do this. Think about if you had a Secretary of Defense 3 years from now who set up a family foundation, and while they were making decisions affecting the U.S. defense industry, they were taking large payments from foreign companies, foreign governments, at the precise time that they were making that decision. That's precisely what happened with Hillary Clinton. And let me just give you a couple of examples of how that occurred. So in 2005, Bill Clinton goes to a country called Kazakhstan in Central Asia. Kazakhstan is one of the former Soviet republics, and Kazakhstan is ruled by a dictator named Nazarbayev. Nazarbayev has this nasty habit of throwing people into jail, beating up human rights activists, you name it. Well, Bill Clinton shows up there in 2005 with a Canadian businessman named Frank Justra. Now, why are they in Kazakhstan? Well, Bill Clinton says he was there to work on the global AIDS crisis, which is one of the issues the Clinton Foundation works on. The problem is Kazakhstan has one of the lowest rates of AIDS in the entire world. It's like 0.03%. The real reason he was there is that Frank Justra wanted something. Kazakhstan doesn't have a lot of things, but what it does have is a lot of uranium. And Frank Justra wanted from the dictator Nazarbayev lucrative uranium concessions. So he shows up with Bill Clinton, and what does Bill Clinton do? He gives Nazarbayev what Nazarbayev wants, legitimacy. He holds a press conference, and I quote this in the book, and he actually says, oh, Kazakhstan has a great human rights record, and Nazarbayev is a wonderful leader. In fact, he's such a great leader, I think he should head up this international human rights organization called the CSCE. He also praises him, and there are elections coming up in Kazakhstan. Elections is a term you should use loosely in Kazakhstan. Everybody condemns them. But Bill Clinton says, this is great, we're going to have a clean election. Frank Justra gets these lucrative uranium concessions from the Kazakh government. 3 weeks later, he sends $33 million to the Clinton Foundation. But the story's not done there. You see, the Canadian investor Frank Justra is going to become one of the largest single contributors to the Clinton Foundation, having pledged more than $100 million to that entity. Well, what does Frank Justra get in return? Think about this for a second. He's got a small uranium company. He's never been in the uranium business before, and they own this lucrative asset in Kazakhstan. And they decide they're going to expand their portfolio, so they start buying uranium assets in the United States, in places like Utah and Wyoming and Texas. And by 2009, somebody comes knocking at the door and says, we would like to buy your company, Uranium One. Who comes knocking at the door? The Russian government, Vladimir Putin. The Russian state-owned atomic nuclear agency, Rosatom, wants to buy the small uranium company called Uranium One that has these assets that Bill Clinton helped to procure. Now, something very curious happens. Uranium One is actually a small Canadian uranium company. They have these very lucrative assets, but they're not very large operationally. Now, when the Russians decide they want to buy this entity, that triggers something in the federal government called CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. Because you see, because this involves a critical industry, uranium, and it involves a foreign government, the Russian government, the federal government has to approve this. And there are a series of government agencies that if any government agency rejects the deal, they basically have veto power. And one of those government agencies is the State Department involving Hillary Clinton. Now, something very strange happens. The Clintons would say it's coincidence. But you've got Frank Justra and 8 other shareholders in this small uranium company decide suddenly that they're going to become big boosters of the Clinton Foundation. And they send a combined $145 million to the Clinton Foundation in the run-up to this federal government approval. And just for good measure, a Kremlin-backed investment fund called Renaissance Capital in Moscow invites Bill to come to Moscow for a $500,000 speech, which is the most that he's ever been paid by far in Russia. He'd only given one other speech in Russia. The money arrives, Hillary Clinton signs off on the deal, and today, 20% of US uranium production in the United States is controlled by Vladimir Putin. And it was signed off on by Hillary Clinton. Now, Hillary Clinton in the past, when it came to these kinds of deals, she was opposed to them. You remember the Dubai ports deal that occurred when you had a sovereign wealth fund from the Middle East that wanted to buy certain U.S. ports, and there was a big outcry about it. Hillary Clinton was adamantly opposed to that deal, and she said, I don't want foreign governments owning critical assets in the United States. So why did she reverse course in this case? You'd have to ask her. I think there's probably 145 million reasons why she reversed course. But here's the bottom line. And ultimately, what I try to tell people about the story in the book and the story that we have laid out in the media, and by the way, the New York Times, when the book came out, ran a 4,000-word front page article on the Russian uranium story, confirmed everything that we reported. We've had the Washington Post, ABC News, and others do the same thing. So this is all stuff that has been verified. But here's the troubling part. This is ultimately not a story just about the Clintons, because here's why. If we know nothing else about the political class in Washington, D.C., it's if they can find a way to get rich off of public service, they're going to do it. And here's what the Clintons have done. They've created a new model for self-enrichment. So if I'm the Secretary of Defense, why not put my spouse out as a speaker and get large speaking fees from foreign governments who are trying to influence American defense policy? The Clintons did it. Why can't I do it? Why not set up a charitable foundation that is designed to, create my legacy? Peter Schweizer is a great guy. Why not set that up and take large payments from foreign entities while I'm the Secretary of State? The Clintons did it. That's the real danger here. You can certainly look at the Clintons, as I do, and be very critical and look at the 2016 campaign and think these are legitimate issues that need to be raised and need to be addressed. But this is a problem far larger than that. This is a question about going forward, are we going to have a political system where our leaders are immune, as much as we can make them, from foreign financial interests? Or are we going to allow it to become a free-for-all? And I would contend that we're almost already there as far as a free-for-all is concerned, unless we're willing to deal with this very difficult issue as it relates to the Clintons. And with that, I'll say thank you, and I'd love to take a few questions. But I think a lot of what you see in Washington, D.C., the debate between left and right, I kind of liken, and some of you probably heard me say this before, to me it's kind of like professional wrestling. Now, when I was a kid growing up in Seattle, Washington, I used to turn on Channel 13, which was the independent channel. And you could see very large men in spandex hitting each other with chairs, throwing each other out of the ring. And when I was 13, I loved it. But as I watched it, I started to realize, wait a minute, these guys actually don't hate each other. These guys are actually in business together. This is all a ruse. Now, if anybody here thinks otherwise, I'm sorry to break it to you. But, I was shocked as a kid. Well, what you see in Washington, D.C., I would contend a lot of times is the same thing. You're seeing the theatrics of people who are pretending that they hate each other and that they are at war with each other politically, but they're actually business partners. They're in business together. And that's why we don't seem to get the change that we need in Washington, D.C. And our motto is follow the money, that a lot of this is about a business model towards self-enrichment of the political class. Yes, sir, in the back. I do think if you look at a lot of the political scandals that we've had for pay-to-play in recent years, you've got Senator Menendez from New Jersey right now who's being prosecuted by the Department of Justice. You had a senator from Virginia who was convicted on receiving some gifts and then apparently doing a favor for a donor. You've got a former governor from Alabama who's in jail. I think it's Riley. For doing the same thing. You had former Governor Keith Sauber in Oregon who resigned because of similar issues. If you look at those fact patterns and compare it to the Clintons, to me there's just no question that what the Clintons have done is far more crossing the line than in any of those other cases. And then the question becomes, why has there not been prosecution? And I think it has to do with the fact that prosecutors, we hate to say it, prosecutors have to make calculations on what resistance and what political flack they're going to face depending on who they go after. And if you go after the Clintons, you're biting off a whole lot more than if you go after the governor of Virginia. Yes, sir. The people that I've talked to, and these are not, anti-Clinton people, these are not people with an axe to grind, these are people that have worked in this space of classified information say that there are several things that cross the line in terms of being illegal. There was a very good piece that sort of conforms with what I heard by Michael Mukasey, who was the U.S. Attorney General before in the Wall Street Journal about a week or so ago. Read that. I think it lays it out very simply and very clearly how classified information is handled. And the fact that Hillary Clinton is saying, "Oh, I didn't know that," is just not true. I mean, it's any U.S. cabinet official gets a briefing that says, here's how you handle classified information, and here is how classified information is defined. So I think the question ultimately comes down to political courage, and that is somebody at the FBI or somebody at the Department of Justice is going to have the courage to take on the Clintons. And I wrote a little tiny book that came out, and I can tell you what we faced with that book is unlike anything I've ever faced in any other book that I've done. I mean, they play for keeps. They are aggressive. They are far more aggressive than anybody else out there politically, and when you talk to reporters, they will tell you that. They will tell you if you write a piece about Jeb Bush that they don't like, you're going to get kind of a snitty email. But you had reporters at the New York Times who wrote a piece on the Clinton Foundation, which was pretty neutral but raised some questions. The Clinton team had seven people go and sit down with her boss and tell her boss why this reporter should not be working for the New York Times. So that's what you're up against. Yes, sir. Question. Great question. How I got into this kind of work. Steve's probably got a good story about how he got into this too. Well, I've written books for a long time, and I really got on the anti-corruption thing from a book I wrote called Throw Them All Out. And it really looked at how, it sort of tried to answer this question, how is it that politicians who come in middle class after 10 years are suddenly worth millions of dollars? How does that work? And I became interested in it really because I ran across this article. This is going to sound really funny and probably kind of weird. I ran across this article that an economist friend shared with me. It was an article in the Journal of Quantitative Economics. And what this study was about was it looked at the stock trades by U.S. senators. And here's what these guys found. These were mathematicians. Here's what they found in this study. And this just, first of all, it shocked me, and then it made me really angry, and it made me want to dig. And I'm digging to this day as Steve is digging and our researchers are digging. Here's what this study found that just blew me away. They said if you look at the statistical analysis, the average American who trades stock on the stock market underperforms the broader market in their stock picks. That corporate executives work for like IBM and you're trading IBM stock, you beat the market by about 5% a year. That hedge funds, the guys who are being paid, huge salaries in New York, they beat the market by 8% a year. This study found that U.S. senators were beating the market by 12% a year. So, I looked at this and I thought, first of all, there's only two explanations here, right? Either these guys are a lot smarter than I thought they were, and I quickly dismissed that. And then I thought, there's got to be something more here. And that sort of nugget got me on wanting to sort of uncover this stuff. Because I do think we spend a lot of time talking about policy. And policy is important, don't get me wrong. But I don't think policy is what motivates a lot of what goes on in Washington, D.C. One of the things I talked about in the next book as I kind of went along this chain was this thing called milker bills, which I don't know if anybody here has heard me talk about before, but milker bills. So, we think members of Congress are introducing pieces of legislation because they passionately believe in this. They want to change, the Department of Health and Human Services, and they want to lower the tax rate to spur economic growth. And there are people that do that. But there's this phenomenon called milker bills that members of Congress will tell me about. Milker bills are not about the dairy industry. Milker bills are bills that you introduce as a member of Congress that you don't want to pass. You do it because you can milk donors with it. You can get money from lobbyists and from entities to do it. And the best is what they call a double milker bill. A double milker bill is a bill you introduce that pits one industry against another. And now you got them both. It's like an arms race. So, when you start looking at those kinds of guts issues and how it functions, it's messy. And I have just sort of felt a calling to continue to work in that space. And I've been blessed to put together a organization called the Government Accountability Institute. We've been around since 2012. We are right here in Tallahassee. We work with news outlets from 60 Minutes to ABC News to Fox News. We do it all here in Tallahassee. We've got 15 employees, and they are all deeply dedicated to what we do, and I'm very blessed to have them. So it's exciting work, it's fun work, it's daunting work. And I think, as Steve would probably say, I mean, there are times when you get really discouraged, because it is, as an Air Force pilot once told me, it's a target-rich environment for corruption. But you get the reward of knowing that at least you are alerting people to what's going on. Now, what they decide to do with it, I can't change somebody's heart and get them motivated, but I can at least say that we made them aware of what was going on. A great question, term limits. And this is one of those issues that I have changed my mind on. I was opposed to term limits initially because I thought, well, if they're a good individual, people should have a right to vote for them. And that's still true to some extent. The problem is it has become so insurmountable for people to resist the temptation. And it gets worse the longer they are there. There's a great line that somebody once told me. He said, when you first come to Washington, D.C., as a member of Congress told me this, when you first come here, you say, gosh, this place is a cesspool. And then you stay a few years and it starts to feel like a hot tub. And there's a lot of truth to that. One of the people that I've worked with is Bobby Jindal, the governor of Louisiana, great guy, incredibly smart. He was a member of Congress, and he said, look, you get into Congress and people tell you you're smarter. They tell you you're better looking. They tell you could be president one day. And if you're not well grounded, you're going to start to believe them. And it's going to lead you to do things that you ordinarily wouldn't do. So I'm a big believer in term limits. I've changed my view on that because that's the ultimate thing. We can't count on individual members of Congress, men or women, resisting these temptations. We have to take the temptation away. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.